MRecktv.
Quick super fact: slavery was a choice because you either had the choice of death or work. But peep how the white man used death to keep slaves. So they would choose slavery. Africans of the time believed that when you died, you were resurrected to go back and be with your ancestors. So certain slaves chose to just die or run off or commit suicide to go back with their ancestors. There are no real taboos on suicide. What the slave masters would do is they would take the bodies and cremate them or destroy them or cut off the limbs of runaway slaves or slaves who committed suicide to keep them from being able to resurrect and go back and be with their ancestors. So not only did the slave masters take their freedom, they also took away the freedom that they would have in death. And so that forced a lot of slaves to choose to stay in slavery. But nigga, what? And just to kind of add on to the point that I made before about slavery being a choice, understand that slavery started not in America. The process of becoming a slave, it didn't start when you got to America or got to Jamaica or got to somewhere in the Caribbean. Slavery started when you got to the shores in Africa. It actually started the moment that you might have got kidnapped from your village or taken as a prisoner of war. The process for you to become a slave started then. You were broken physically, mentally, and slaves are human beings. So through torture, people would capitulate. Women were raped. People were just broken down mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, linguistically unable to communicate with their fellow person because they were from a different tribe. And all that took place in Africa at the slave castles. So prior to you even getting to a place to get on your feet where you think slavery begins in America, and then you got all these choices that you can do, you're dealing with people that might have been in the slave castle in Ghana for 3 or 4 months, malnourished, being beaten, being psychologically tortured, and et cetera, et cetera. So their choices were actually quite few and slim. What you see in a lot of the revolts is certain slaves who were already either active. What you see in a lot of the revolts is certain slaves who were already either active militarily to a certain degree, or were so ingrained. Think about Toussaint, right? In Haiti. Toussaint wouldn't have been able possibly to overthrow or have that revolt if he couldn't speak French. So you got somebody who already had to be incorporated inside of the society itself to even have the choice to revolt or overthrow the shackles of slavery in the face of all of the other kind of pieces and parts that go along with them becoming slaves. So understand that slaves are humans. They were subject to all type of torture. It wasn't as simple as when you got to America, now you got the choice to either be this or be that. Your destiny was pretty much wrote out for you. And then understand a lot of these people that were slaves, rest in peace, they died. They didn't make it through their first 2 years. The lifespan of a slave, once you hit a plantation, was only a matter of a few years. In some cases, a few months, especially places like Brazil. So you got to take that into consideration as well, as how many choices do you have when you don't know what the outlook or what the future is. You don't know where you are. You run off where you gonna go. You can't swim, et cetera, et cetera. You don't know how to pilot a boat. There's a lot of factors which physically and environmentally occur for people to choose that type of lifestyle. It's no different than if you were put as a modern person put into those same positions today. No matter how radical or rebellious a gangster you think that you are, if somebody puts you in a position to be tortured, if that was the case, why do people stay in prison? Right? Because they can't get out that bitch. So, I mean, take all that in consideration and add that to the context. But still, nigga, what the fuck are you talking about? But I get it. And just one final point with the choices, and I promise this is it. I'm gonna talk about no more. The difference between a slave that was brought over from Africa and somebody who was born into slavery, somebody who was a born slave. A born slave, they were born into the context of that's all that they knew. Their life was controlled from the time that they were born, what went into their mouths, what went into their brains, who they saw, who they could talk to, who was their role models. And if your role model is another slave, and that's what you see, and that's what you gain your impressions of how you should act and behave, then that's what you're going to kind of mimic, on top of all the other brainwashing and psychological warfare that took place in the mind of a slave. Now imagine just a baby or a child, right? A child seeing that. So when you think of slaves that were born slaves, mostly in America, because in the Caribbean, the Caribbean and South America, that slave trade was more about they had to keep bringing in new slaves because the conditions were so terrible at the mines or the plantations or whatever. They just kept dying. In America, you had people that actually bred slaves, right? Or slaves just naturally being married and having kids and having children in that circumstance, in that situation. And those children were brought up in an environment where they had no prior context, that there was a such thing as called freedom, because it was ingrained into them mentally that this is what they were and who they were and what their life was supposed to be, right? Reinforced through religion and all type of other situations to accept their circumstances, but they didn't really have any understanding or awareness of there was a potential outside of their circumstances. So just to end on that, slavery was a choice, but not what you think it was. You know what I'm saying? Be good to each other. Peace and much love to you. Super facts.
I'm not black. I'm Kanye. Okay. I ain't judging, but you bugging. And I'm usually the one considered objective. I keep an open mind. I'm always willing to listen if it's suggested. I'm optimistic. I don't like nobody opinion neglected. But the shit you kicking, making it real hard to defend your perspective. Let's take it back to the beginning a second. Hopefully I can make you remember how it felt before selling millions of records. Remember sleeping on suede couch. Only meal you could afford was just breakfast. Every time you try to walk in for a deal, get rejected. It was a black man who gave you a chance to help you deliver your message. College dropout had the whole hood feeling accepted. Through the wire was so real. That's why we really respected. 99% black folks helped you build your collection. We was ecstatic when we seen you reach the bigger successes. Cause we was with you from the ground. We felt interconnected. We was right by your side when you started getting expressive. We had to deal with all your pictures and dresses. Nigga, you remember when you slipped in your depression, you lost your moms, but that helped us build a bigger connection. Even in your Taylor Swift interjection, we blamed it on the Henny, but in our mind, we like, this nigga is reckless. But then the powers that be step in, felt they would do some correcting before you reach a status where it's nothing they could do to deflect it. They knew you having too big of an influence was threatening, so they played it smart, and they figured you could be used as a weapon. Son, you was shining in the East, you had inner reflection. You moved to LA, added some new additions to Westerns. You had North and went South. They put it in the projection. They had your moral compass spinning in all different directions. Nigga, you lost.
It's crummy beats, y'all.
Peace, world. To promote your music or promote your business by placing an ad on MRecktv, contact MRecktVpromo, MRecktVpromo @gmail.com. Peace.
Switch things to the opposite way. It's the Mac that the strippers and the groupies pay. Yeah, bands make her dance. You can't juice this J.
We bout to terrorize the rap game.
Fuck it right and give it back pain. Ever since a kid, he stayed focused, barely hung out. Pops went to jail, mom Dukes got strung out. Like Jordan with the tongue out, determined to win.
And got the best product out, and you killing the strip. I taught the money gymnastics, I'm making it flip. Hit the block hard, yes, early morning on the wake up. Betty Crocker cook skills, help me get my cake up.
Cussies coming left and right, it feels like the first. The money is a gift, but them bills is a curse. I'm a overachiever, not a superstition believer. I'm good everywhere, like credit from a visa.
The rotten apple, you could get shot in your Adam's apple. Giving God praise, leaving out the tabernacle.
Lemon squeeze, trigger 45. I feel like Kevin Costner, bodyguard. Holding down Whitney, that paperwork got his name on it. They snitch niggas in every...
Oh yeah, subscribe to MRecktv, youtube.com. MRecktv. I'm gone.
MRecktv.
It's got a music.